Hello and welcome to Hippo Entertainment RPG series. I am your host Paul, and today we are going DMing. Today we are going to be looking at the creature creation rules from the Pathfinder 2nd Edition's Dungeon Master's Guide. So sit back, grab a cup of tea, and let's get into creating the NPCs and creatures you need for your games. To begin with, we'll need to be opening our DMG to page 56, the section titled Building Creatures. We are greeted with an overview detailing the steps needed and what pages they are on. First, we should develop a concept. Do you want to have rancors in your game? What about the big baddie that pops up randomly in your adventure? You likely already have a basic idea, but as you add to the concept, taking notes can help you keep your creature on track. Once we have the concept, we need to look at the stat block. This is actually what you'll be referring to when you're DMing. We then need to design all the abilities our creatures will use. We will look at active, reactive, defensive, constant and automatic abilities. Once we've done that, we'll look at the creature holistically and just see if this creature feels the way you want it to feel and does it fit into your needs and goals. When developing the concept, you need to look at considering the parts of your creature you most find compelling and what you want to emphasize when that creature hits the table. Note your creature's core aspects, and if you feel uncertain later, you can look back and ask yourself, does this emphasize the core aspect or not? Next, look at the creature's role in your game. Is it meant to be a combatant, a social creature, or a trusted ally? Figuring this out will help you determine whether to give it strong combat abilities or to focus on skills, spells, and other abilities. Think about how the creature might behave if it's in a fight, if someone tries to talk to it, or if it's in a social situation. Does it work better alone or with allies? What sort of character should be best at facing it, or particularly weak against it? Consider also the complexities of the creature. This matters most when you plan to use a large number of creatures of that type, as you'll want their turns to move quickly and avoid complicated actions, especially if there's more than 5 of them on the table at once. A creature likely to face a group of PCs alone can have more abilities, and it may need a more versatile set of defences against PC tactics. Cut complexity out as much as you can while retaining your desired theme. Now, how do you want an encounter with this creature to feel? Should it be scary, mobile, confusing, a mystical duel, or a knockdown, drag-out fight? What can you give your creature to convey those characteristics? Note that much of this feel will come from when you choose your creature's special abilities or spells rather than its raw numbers. With all this in mind, think about the special abilities your creature should have. You can use the abilities from the bestiary or feats in the core rulebook, adjusting as you need it. To save yourself time, it helps to think of a creature that's similar to yours and see what makes it tick. See what else you can steal from it. Maybe you can just reskin a creature instead of making new ones from scratch. Now that you understand your creature's concept, it's time to go to the statistics. But remember that you can always change your concept later on. Your creature might evolve and transform as you go, so be open to change and revisions. So let's apply this to our creatures. First, our big baddie needs to be a truly vile individual. He will be a corrupted human with thoughts of becoming a lich. I don't want him to be relying on direct damage spells, but more spells to slow the party down while his undead minions tear them apart. I also need to have him have an escape clause so he can keep coming back. I want him to have a high intelligence, medium wisdom and dexterity, terrible strength and constitution, and an abysmal charisma. Let's face it, he is truly a vile individual. He, however, also needs a lieutenant to control his living minions, so he hired a mercenary veteran. But this guy kinda had some morals and wouldn't play ball, so our big baddie decided the best thing to do was control him through magic. This has left our mercenary's mind a little weak to mind-affecting spells. However, his training will still kick in and make it very hard to frighten him. He will be heavily armoured with a shield and a flail, and will be relying on staying on the battlefield controlling his troops rather than dealing damage, but he can still pack a wallop when he needs to be. So, that's the concept. Let's look at the stat blocks. First, we need to know the level the creature will be created at. Most creatures sit between 0 and 24, but your creature's level may not be its representing level. Let me explain. The level shown is the combat level, however, they may have a different level for social encounters. A smith may only be a level 3 combatant, and that's what his stats will refer to, but he will be level 6 when dealing with crafting and social interactions. That is where his skills come into play. Next is the trait line. Most of the creatures will fit into one of the following categories found on page 70. This will also give us a general shared stats that the creature has, such as animals being neutral aligned with no known languages and an intelligence of 4 for birds, fish and mammals, and -5 for insects. Some stats will include immunities and weaknesses, as well as spells or other information, such as the Devil's List. For NPCs, you can add the humanoid and the trait of their heritage, while adjusting their size, speed and perception as needed. Now, we need to understand how the DMG displays the stat blocks and the scales of all the stats they give you. This will usually break into 5 groupings. Extreme, this is the pinnacle of their stat block, and usually a creature will have 1 extreme stat if they're lucky. High, creatures and NPCs are usually pretty good at this stat. They'll have between 2 to 3 skills leveled up to high. Moderate, this is the run-of-the-mill normal statistics you'll be expecting at that level. Low, the characters are definitely not good at these stats, and you look at these sort of things like a mage will not have very high combat stats. Their combat stats will be low. However, a fighter will have very low magical stats. And terrible, these are the truly awful stats showing a serious character flaw in your creature. There are 2 tables that will help you choose what scale your stats should be at. The base roadmap on page 59 is for most creatures and horde NPCs, such as stat blocks for army troops or groups of cultists, where the roadmap found on page 73 is for more defined named NPCs. Now let's have a look at all the separate blocks. First, we have a look at the ability modifiers. These are the modifiers, not the actual abilities. So a creature with a +5 in strength is actually having a 20 strength. These will also look exactly the same as your character sheet will do. So you have strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom and charisma. Use high for the creature's best ability modifiers, moderate for the ones they're okay at, and low for the rest. If a creature has truly bad ability, such as a terrible one, you can go as low as -5. Few creatures use the extreme column. A powerful dedicated spellcaster may use an extreme spellcasting statistic, or a preternaturally charming creature like a succubus or a nymph may have an extreme charisma modifier. However, the most common way extreme numbers are used is for really big, really strong creatures such as giants and dragons. The next stat is perception. Perception is pretty straightforward. Use wisdom as your guideline for your setting, so if you use a high wisdom, generally use the high perception. There are sometimes rules that will break this, so just play it by ear. You could have a character with very high wisdom, but terrible perception. Other things to look into is the senses, such as low light vision, dark vision, or tremor sense. If you're making a sense from scratch, simply decide what the sense is, whether it has a range limit, and whether it's precise or imprecise. Next, you have the languages. What sort of language would the creature need to communicate with other creatures in its home? For instance, many intelligent undead creatures speak Necrol, and many creatures from the Darklands speak Undercommon. If you want your creature to be able to speak to the PCs, make sure it has Common. You have a lot of flexibility in setting your creature's skills. Pick some skills you think are appropriate and consider how good the creature is at them. High skills are roughly on par with a specialised PC of the creature's level, although they could be a little lower or higher. Most creatures have at least 1 high skill, but no more than 3. At the best, skills should go with the best ability modifier. Most creatures don't have an extreme skill unless it fits their lore, such as a succubus's diplomacy. You can also add special thematic modifiers for certain skills. For instance, you might have a creature that excels at climbing, so their athletics may be +7, but it could be +9 to climb or grab. If you give a creature gear equivalent to the PC, your PCs would gain a huge amount of treasure by defeating a large group of them. So use the following safe table. This can help you avoid that. A creature can have a single permanent item of the listed level without an issue. For example, if a 6th level creature has a +1 weapon, That item's not worth so much that the NPCs would be massively rich if they encountered many creatures of that type and sold everything they found. You can give a creature several lower level items too. Just pay attention to your overall treasure as measured against the guidelines on page 508 and 510 of the core rulebook. Because armor class is one of the most important combat stats, you need to be more careful when setting this number for creatures you might expect to end up in a fight. Low AC typically fits spellcasters who compensate with their selection of powerful spells. High is usually for your fighter characters such as your monks, fighters and champions, whereas medium is more your non-martial or your high damage dealing characters such as barbarians, rogues and investigators. You may want to adjust the creature's hit points, armor class and saves in tandem. Almost no creature has great defense in all areas, as such creatures would often result in frustrating fights. A creature with higher AC may have fewer hit points and weaker saves, and one that's easier to hit could have more HP and stronger fortitude to compensate. This depends on the theme of the creature. An extreme AC may mean reducing the creature's hit points to the next lowest category. You can often set save and throws quickly by assigning one high, one moderate and one low modifier. Some creatures may vary from this, either because they have poor AC but better saves, or because they should thematically have multiple good saves and compensate elsewhere. Give a creature hit points in the moderate rating, unless the theme strongly suggests it should use another range. Spellcasters, for example, have a low hit point. Brutish creatures usually have a high hit points, compensating with lower armor classes and weaker saves. Hit points are closely tied in with immunities, weaknesses and resistance. So your creature has any of those, look into that before finalising your hit points. Your creature may also have health regenerating, fast healing or some other way of healing itself. These healing abilities can greatly affect the flow of a fight. If a creature can use an ability that heals it, an ability typically restores more HP since it costs actions. An at-will healing ability should be based on the heal spell 2 levels lower than the highest level a creature of that level could ordinarily cast. For example, an 11th level creature can typically cast up to 6th level spells, so you would have a base healing ability on it equivalent to the 4th level healing spell. If this ability both deals damage and heals, use the same baseline scale from above, but with vampiric touch instead of heal. If it's highly thematic for a creature to have immunity, weaknesses or resistance, consider adding them. Immunities are generally reserved for creatures made of an unusual substance, like a fire elemental being immune to fire. If a creature should be hard to affect with something, but the conditions above aren't true, then give it a resistance instead. For example, a giant octopus isn't actually made of cold water, so it wouldn't be immune to cold water, but life in the ocean depths has made it resistant to cold. You'll typically find the lower end of the table for a broad resistance that applies to a wide range of effects, and the high end for something narrower, like a single damage type. A creature with a resistance, especially a broad resistance or a physical resistance, usually has fewer HP. Giving your creature weaknesses adds flavour to it and greatly rewards effective player tactics once your players identify the weakness. The weakness should be applied to one of the damage types or phenomenon and use the high end of the scale. Creatures typically have one or more weakness. If a creature has a weakness, especially something common, give it additional HP. Your creature's speed should generally be 25 feet if it moves like a human. Beyond that, you can set your speed to whatever makes sense. Remember that a creature can move up to triple its number if it spends its whole time moving. So if you want the PCs to be able to chase the creature, its speed can only be so high. When building your creature's selection of strikes, use the following selections to set the strike's attack bonus and damage. Use a high attack bonus for combat creatures. A creature could have a high attack bonus and a low damage, or vice versa. For instance, a moderate attack bonus and an extreme damage might feel the creature's more like a barbarian. Spellcasters typically have poor attack bonuses, potentially in exchange for an extreme spell DC. A creature that's meant to be primarily a combat threat uses high damage for its melee strikes, or moderate for melee strikes that have the agile trait. Range attacks more typically use the moderate value, or sometimes even a lower value. A creature that's meant to be highly damaging uses the extreme damage value, but then it might have a moderate attack bonus. Just like a PC, your creature may be able to cast spells. If so, same as PCs, you have a spell attack bonus and a spell DC. When choosing spells, lean hard into the creature's theme. While many PCs choose spells to cover a wide variety of situations, creatures are more evocative the more focused they are. Consider selecting about 3/4 of the spells based on relevance to the theme, and the remainder for other things. However, make sure the spells aren't one note. Selecting Fireball for most of the creature's spell slots doesn't make it a compelling fire creature, or very diverse. Spell slots work best for creatures that are meant to play like PC spellcasters. Choose the magical tradition best suited for the creature. You aren't strictly limited to the traditions here, although sticking close will make your creature's connection to the tradition more clear. The decision to use prepared or spontaneous spellcasters should align with the creature's theme. A spontaneous spellcaster fits well with one-off creatures, since spontaneous spellcasting grants greater flexibility in the middle of battle, while a prepared spellcaster makes for great reoccurring characters who can change their spells between appearances. For a creature that can cast as many spells as a PC spellcaster, the highest spell level the creature can cast is half their level rounded up. Your creature will get 5 cantrips. If its level is odd, then it will get 2 spell slots of the highest level. If it's even, it'll be 3 spell slots of the highest level, plus 3 spell slots for each level underneath that, sometimes up to 4 depending on how you want. For more information on innate spells and rituals, just have a look at page 66 and 67 of your DMG. In this step, you'll take the ideas for abilities you noted when you developed your concept and design these abilities for your creature. You can look at existing creatures' abilities from the bestiary and feats from the core rulebook, and use them as is or modified to fill your needs. When choosing abilities, think of both the number of abilities and the diversity of the abilities. Having a large number of similar abilities can make the creature tougher to run, and probably can't use them all anyway. Diversity of abilities gives the creature different ways to act in different situations. For instance, a combat creature may have one ability it uses to get into position and another one when it wants to focus damage on a single enemy, and then a third that's more defensive. There are a few key principles of ability design construction that you want to keep in mind. Respect the action economy. Make sure the abilities are level appropriate, and avoid invisible abilities. The action economy is understanding the creature's actions when making it play. Remember how short the lifespan of a typical combat creature is. Including a bunch of combat abilities may mean you spend more time building the actions of the creatures and you'll never get to use them. Narrow your selection down to the smallest and most compelling set that makes sense. Because of the PC capabilities at higher levels, creatures at those levels should get more abilities that improve their action economy. For instance, a creature that grapples should have the improved grab instead of grab. The level of an ability should be appropriate to the creature's level. For damaging abilities, that means that they follow the damage guidelines we spoke about earlier. For others, take a look at spells and feats with similar effects to see if they're level appropriate. For instance, say you're considering giving a 6th level creature the ability to teleport a short distance. Dimension Door is comparable, but a creature shouldn't be able to use the ability more than once per encounter. You can also compare your creature to those in the bestiary volume to see if the special abilities seem similar to the power of those creatures at the same level. Avoid abilities that do nothing but change the creature's math. These are known as invisible abilities. These alter a creature's statistic in a way that is invisible to players, which means the creature's less engaging because the players don't see it using all its abilities in a tangible or evocative way. Abilities a creature uses on this turn have the most flexibility and scope. You can use the table for spell attack bonus to determine active abilities DC as well as the ability DC. You can have an ability use 1 to 3 actions as needed or be a free action in rare case, and use just about any type of tactic. Feats, spells and existing creature abilities provide a wide variety of examples, so look for something similar to your ideas to use that as a base. Consider how you want your creature to spend its turns. 2 action activities pretty much define the creature's turn, and single actions work best for supplemental benefits or normal strikes and walking. Use free actions that don't have triggers sparingly, and when you do, they should almost always be used for support or utility actions, not strikes or movements. If you come up with a free action, consider whether it should be on its own action or as part of a combo, such as drawing a weapon and attacking. In the case like the latter, you may be better off to make a single action that allows the creature to draw a weapon and then strike. If the special action is a single action with only one target, you can often set the damage using the melee strike table we discussed earlier. If it uses more than one action, or requires setup in some way, then it may deal higher damage than as usual. Often you can just use the extreme column of the strike damage table. For abilities that deal damage in an area, use this following table. These numbers are based on 2 action activities, i.e. the most damaging of spells. Single actions should deal much less damage. An ability that has another significant effect, like applying a condition, should be less damage dealing for this. Look at the damage 2 or more levels lower and judge if that value would better suit your character's maths. The following table has unlimited uses and limited uses. Unlimited uses are uses that are generally once per turn, whereas limited uses should be limited to once per encounter. Active offensive abilities usually fit a creature better than defensive abilities do. Save defense increases for certain creatures that are strongly defensive themed. For martial creatures, something as simple as shield and shield block is usually plenty. Defensive abilities often run the risk of being invisible abilities. For good defensive abilities, look at the spell like Sanctuary for ideas, or other spells that create interesting, productive effects instead of just granting a straight-out bonus. Reactions and free actions with triggers can give the creature an impact outside its turn. This makes the fight feel more interesting, but it may be just a little bit risky. And while you may want to give every creature a reaction, sometimes that's just not a good idea. To decide whether your creature should have a reaction, first consider if the creature has reflexes or insights to react well enough in the first place. For instance, an ogre doesn't have an attack of opportunity because it is a big fat oaf. Oozes, constructs and unintelligent creatures are also less likely to have reactions than other creatures you may design. Secondly, look at the complexity of the encounter your creature is likely to appear in. If you have a large number of creatures, skip-in reactions can make the fight flow faster. A creature that's more likely to fight solo, on the other hand, may have a reaction to give it a way to continue to be dangerous amidst the onslaught of the attacks of the party. The best reactions should be telegraphed so when they happen, it makes sense to the players. Think of one of the core reactions in the game, shield block. The creature raises its shield, an obvious action that the PCs can see, so when it blocks damage from an attack, that makes perfect sense. Certain abilities shouldn't actually use actions. Auras are a common constant ability with a frightful presence. A red dragon's Dragon Heat is a good example of this. An aura needs a range, and it needs a DC. Usually, you'll set this to the moderate spell DC unless the aura is one of the creature's defining concepts. Abilities the creature has no control over should be automatic. For example, a living wildfire elemental explodes into flames when it dies. This has no option not to do so, so it wouldn't make any sense as a reaction or a free action. Conversely, the ferocity ability is a reaction because it requires a creature to give itself one last push to stay at 1 hit point. Now it's time to look over your completed creature as a whole and make sure it's living up to your concept. Can it do everything you wanted it to do? Does it fit its intended role? If the creature is built for combat, run through a few turns in your head. Does it work decently? Can it move into combat? How good is it in the fight? How good is it in social interactions? When you're satisfied with your creation, it's ready to hit the table, but that's not necessarily the end. If you notice issues during the game, you can fix them on the spot. It's your game. You're free to change pretty much anything you want about it. So let's take everything we've learned today to go over the 2 characters I outlined in our character concept. First is the villain. Okay, so at the back in the NPC gallery there is actually a necromancer. However, I wasn't terribly happy with a lot of his spells, and I want this guy to be a lot higher level. This is going to be the main bad guy harassing the party for a while. So I'm upping his level to 10. His alignment, size and traits, he'll be chaotic evil, he'll be a medium, human and humanoid. His ability modifier is going to be a high intelligence, medium wisdom and dexterity, and terrible strength, constitution and charisma. His perception and senses is going to be a high perception, however he doesn't have any special senses whatsoever. The languages, he can speak Common and Necrol. He's spoken so long with the undead he's actually picked up their language. His skills, he has high arcane and religion, moderate crafting, mainly for his talismans he'll be needing to make, and low intimidation. That's mainly to keep his minions in check. Items, he'll have a simple mace, no magic whatsoever in that, basic robes, a box of scrolls that will be randomly determined, and a spell book. This will be a powerful spell book and will have a couple of extra spells. I think I'll probably put in 1 or 2 higher level spells for the primary spellcaster to learn at a later level. His armor class will be a low AC. For his save and throws, I'm going to have a moderate reflex and will and a low fortitude. Hit points will be a low hit points. Immunities, weaknesses and resistance, well, he's built up a resistance to necromantic effects. So necromantic spells that do damage will do generally 5 less damage, and necrotic effects causing a status will consider that status 1 lower. His speed will be 25 feet as usual, his strikes will be a low attack and a low damage. He doesn't do well in melee. His spells, he's going to have a high spell attack and a high DC. Now we're going to have him take the spells Ray of Enfeeblement, False Life and Vampiric Maiden. This is to hinder the party and to get life back should he be hit. We are then going to have Grim Tentacles, Fungal High Fear and Cloud Kill. These will be his spell damage at range. I feel this kind of fits his theme. Taking these grim death tentacles out and hitting people with it, creating a cloud of death, and the fungal high fear is basically creating dead vines and dead plants. You'll find it in the Gods and Magic book, and at a heightened level which he has learnt it at, the vines can sprout up and be used to attack at range. However, they're not very good at attacking, that's mainly just to hinder the party. Then he has 6 different spells to raise and control the undead to fight for him. Finally, should the party get to him, he can always cast Drop Dead. This will make a very powerful illusion of himself that looks like he's fallen dead on the ground. Solid enough that only a strong investigation will actually be able to detect it's an illusion, but by the time somebody has had time to look at that, he would have been able to run away, as the spell also casts invisibility on himself. And here is the completed character sheet for him. Now we can look at the Mercenary Bandit. We will be looking at the fighter roadmap for this creature. I'm going to have him running as a level 4 creature. This should be good for characters between 3 to about 5. His alignment, size and traits, I'm going to have him chaotic neutral. He's not actually an evil character, but he's close to it. And I'm going to have him medium, humanoid, human, and I've decided to have him as a half-orc. His ability modifier, I'm going to be having his strength high, dexterity moderate, constitution moderate high, somewhere in between. His intelligence and wisdom below low, and his charisma moderate. So he's not very smart and he's not very wise, that's why he is usually a mercenary. He'll just take whatever money he can. However, his charisma, he's good at intimidating people. His languages and senses, I'm going to have it moderate for his fighter and low light for his orc heritage. His languages will be Common and Orcish. His skills will be Athletics high, Intimidation moderate, Stealth and Survival low. The items in his hand is a flail, crossbow on his back, he will have his own armour which is splint mail, and he will have a high grade shield. This shield will have more hit points and can resist more damage when he raises his shield. His AC will be extreme. This character is designed to stay on the battlefield and control through his minions. He's basically yelling at his minions and getting them to do the fighting. He's not going to be very high on attack, but he can stay in the fight a lot longer. So he knows how to stay alive. Saying that, his saving throws will be high fortitude, medium reflex, and a low will save. His hit points will be the lower end of high. I didn't really think moderate was okay, but I did put them just at the lowest end of high. His immunities, weaknesses and resistance, so he's going to be resistant to fear effects, however he will be weak to other mental effects. This is to represent he's currently been mind controlled, so he's going to be more susceptible to mind control in the future. His speed is 25 just like a normal human. His strikes will be high, but only a moderate damage, so he knows how to hit, but he doesn't hit that hard at all. He doesn't actually have any spells. And his design ability is I'm going to get him to focus on shield abilities from the fighter's feet. He will also have the defensive Orc Ferocity ability, so that if he goes down, he won't actually die. He can always use his one hit point to run away. I am planning something special for this in the game, but we'll get into that when we play the game. I'll also be giving him Sudden Charge. This is not an offensive ability, but he can always use his Shield Bash once he gets into combat. Okay, so this should make him a tough fight for the characters between 3 to 5, depending on how many player characters there are. But he's not a damage dealer, so I don't expect the party to wipe, or in reality any characters to even die. Most characters should be able to take him one-on-one. So all up, these characters took about 10 to 15 minutes to make. NPCs and creatures do not need to be fully fledged characters that you spend hours on. In a few minutes, with these rules, you can get memorable characters and NPCs for your adventures. So I hope you've learnt a lot. I will have these characters available for download should you want to have them in your games. If you like this video, then please like, share and leave a comment. If you have another topic you'd like me to cover, write that down in the comments and I'll look into that for you. But thank you for watching. Please subscribe, as that's the best way to help grow this channel, and you can also support this channel through Patreon and joining us at Discord. So, thank you very much and farewell.